Welcome to the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. I'm Coach Lisa Callahan, a recovered emotional eater. I ended decades of self-inflicted struggles with food through taking a journey of self-discovery, which revealed the secrets of what was going on underneath the food. Throughout this podcast, we'll explore topics that are rarely talked about, like low self-esteem, lack of confidence, people-pleasing, and decades of self-sabotaging behaviors. Rather than just focusing on the food, we'll dive deeper into aspects of who you are as a person and how you ended up relying on food for comfort to begin with. My mission is simple: to empower women to regain their confidence and prioritize self-love, regardless of the number on the scale. Discover what you've really been craving, and trust me, it's not about the food. This podcast is based on insights shared from the Women's Emotional Eating Community Support Group on Facebook, so be sure to check out the show notes for the link to the group and a complimentary gift just for you. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hey, welcome to another fun and insightful episode of the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. The topic today is how to stay in your power around food, and we're going to talk about the 4 parts of food freedom. So I'm gathering this information for you from a guide that I created called the Food Freedom Power Guide. And in the show notes, if you want, you can download the Power Guide, and that'll take you along the journey of what we're going to talk about today. So understanding when you're thinking about food having power, honestly, it really doesn't have power. Yes, there's energy in food, and you want to eat foods that are going to energize your, motivation and feel good about yourself and not drag you down and not feel like it's, congesting your digestive system and making you feel like you're, regurgitating and making your stomach feel bad and all that stuff for sure. So you want to eat foods that have, good nutrition and feel like pleasant to your body. Yet at the same time, the power that we're talking about is where food actually has a voice, where food actually talks to you, and where food has some kind of power over your decisions that you're making for yourself, where you feel like you're now out of control, you're just kind of helpless, and food has all the power. So that's the kind of power that we're talking about today in the episode. So we want to talk about this in 4 parts, and I always like to inspire you to get a piece of paper and maybe be somewhere where you can sit and write during these episodes. But if you're driving or you're out and about on a walk or whatever, go ahead and listen to the episode, and you can listen to it more than once for sure. So we're going to talk about 4 different parts of food freedom today. And if anybody knows how I like to roll here, I like to dive right in because I kind of feel like struggling with emotional eating is a real drag. Honestly, it weighs you down. I struggled for over 30 years. And honestly, the sooner I fix this problem, the better. So before we do get started, I really want to let you know that emotional eating is fixable. So if you're sitting here and you're struggling and you're struggling and you're struggling, you're listening to this episode or podcast, and you kind of think to yourself, well, these are really good tips and, really good information. I want you to take action, because if you're just sitting here on the sidelines, just listening to information and, thinking it's like good information for someone like you who has an emotional eating issue, and that you feel like you're always going to have this. And, it's really nice to listen to some tips on how to fix it, but you're never really going to fix it. I want you to look in the mirror for a minute, and I want you to ask yourself why. And then I want you to think, if not me, who? So I struggled with emotional eating for over 30 years, and it was a really impossible journey at the time, because I thought that's what I just had to deal with. I thought that those were the cards that I was dealt. And I really just felt like I was just one of those people who could not control themselves around food. I saw other people that were able to have ice cream in the freezer and not want to dig out the little cookie dough pieces and then hide it, cover it up to the point where then the next person's going in to get ice cream and they're like, why is there no cookie dough in the cookie dough ice cream? I don't know. I didn't do anything. No, I didn't even eat ice cream. Like to the point where I would lie about it. And so when we're talking about this today and we're talking about food having power, I want you to think about the times that you've told yourself that food talks to you. I want you to think about the times that you've thought to yourself, I just can't say no. It's calling my name. Or even the times where you've given it so much power that you tell yourself that all you have to do is look at cookies and you gain 10 pounds. Those things are lies. They're not true. They are what we would consider to be denials. And I used to think, and I think many people might think this as well, that they always say like, get to the truth, that like once you get to the truth, then you'll, be able to like solve the mystery of like where your struggles lie. The thing is though, is that that's not actually true at all. What is true is that you want to uncover the denials, because the denials are going to lead you to the truth. And so as you start to think about like, why not you? How come you're struggling with emotional eating? Why do you feel like food has power over you? And when will you take the action steps to fix this problem? Now, you might be thinking, well, Lisa, that's great and all, that you fixed it. Nice for you. That's not how I am. I'm this way. And so we always want to like single ourselves out, and we always want to feel like we're the only one. And I promise you, I felt that way too. And what I know now is that we are all the unreliable narrators of each other's stories, that we're all living in the same world and just we're sharing different realities. So our reality is just coming through our own set of eyes. And the thing is if you continue to believe that this problem isn't fixable, there you'll sit. One of my favorite quotes is from Henry Ford that says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you'll be right. And so as we start to unravel this problem, I want you to ask yourself, like, if not now, when? So emotional eating is 100% fixable. And I want to be able to take you through a journey of how you can fix this problem today, just by putting these 4 parts of this food freedom episode together. So we'll dive into part 1, which is understanding triggers. Then we'll move into part 2, which is called conscious intentions. Then we'll go to part 3, which is subconscious intentions. And we'll finish off with part 4, that is my favorite, which is called imperfect action. Now, if you want to turn off this episode right now because I just said the word imperfect and you're like, no, Lisa, I have to have it perfect, then I want you to stick around. I want to inspire you to open up your mindset to a new level of awareness. And I think that if you can open up your mindset to a new level of awareness, you'll be able to see that the only way to get from where you are right now to where you want to be, which we'll just call it from here to there, is to travel through a bunch of heres. So think about little steps, like I'm going to go from here to here, and then from here to here, and then from here to here, and so on and so forth. And then I'll get to there. All we're ever looking for you to do when you're working on changing your mindset and inevitably fixing the root cause of your emotional eating struggles is to take imperfect action and to take one first right next step at a time. Now, notice the word right next step. Now, you might think that your right next step is to go on a diet so that you can lose the weight, so that then you can feel good about yourself. So I really want to ask you to ask yourself, how is that way working for you? If it is, great. If you've done it more than once, it's not working. And that's the proof that you can share with yourself when you tell yourself, well, it works for a while, and then I put the weight back on. And then I go on a diet again. And then it works for a while, but then I put the weight back on. And then I go on a diet again. Like, really just ask yourself, how many times have you done that? How many times have you rolled round and round and round the same cycle? Doing it more than once means that it's not working. Do you see what I mean? So let's go ahead and talk about why you are going to want to stay in your power around food and what this training is going to teach you. So without curiosity, you'll just think that you know how it is, and you'll never gain access to new information. And that's why you've been telling yourself the same old thing for decades now, and it hasn't worked for you, but yet you're still going to tell yourself the same thing, and you're still going to tell yourself that it is working, even though you know it's not, because you've had to do it more than once. If it worked, if literally like you crushed your food thing, or you were able to fix your emotional eating habits, you might not even be listening to this podcast anymore. I mean, I'd love to have you and everything. But at the same time, I want you to be able to gain access to so much freedom that will lead you to the next part of your life where you want to learn something else. Because just sitting here and listening to all the tips and everything, but not actually taking action and not fixing the problem, like, how long do you want to do that? If not now, when? So as we move into this this episode, I want you to take a high-level overview of what the word power means to you, so that you can take an overview of how it is that you're handling your own personal power around food. And so what we're going to teach you here, again, is that food does not have power over you. So I want you to be able to get a taste of your own power, and then you won't actually be hungry for anything else. And so let's talk first about what the word personal power means, and then we can take it through the 4 parts. So personal power is your ability to trust in yourself, to make conscious decisions that feel good in the moment, like you're making a decision, I'm going to eat this cookie now. And that lasts long term, where you wake up in the morning and you're like, wow, that cookie was great. And you don't think about it in a way that's like, oh gosh, I wish I didn't eat that cookie. What's wrong with me? I did it again. I screwed up. Like, where you can make an actual decision and not have it take away your personal power. Your personal power is your integrity. It's your highest power. It's your truth. It's who you are as a human being. It's being able to trust yourself to make a decision that you can make in the moment and then have it last long term. It's about recognizing that you have a awareness inside of you, and that's a strength. And so if you're able to have this strength inside of you and not just give it away to food, which doesn't have power because it's not talking, it's not saying anything, even though you might tell yourself that, it's just not true. Like, a cookie is not talking to you. It feels like it is, and I know that, but it's not talking to you on a conscious level. And so when you're able to stay in your power and connect with yourself on a deeper level, you'll be able to stay in alignment with your integrity. Now, the word integrity is being whole and undivided. So that means that there's not going to be this other side of you that's telling you, hurry up, nobody's looking, do it right now, go, 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 come on, let's go, pull into the gas station, pull into the fast food. You can, there's none of that in the back of your head. Now, I know that you might be listening here and you might be like, Lisa, you're crazy. There's always going to be that little voice in the back of your head. Not necessarily true, actually. We can teach you through self-discovery how to be able to have that voice come in and be like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Kind of like a little kid who's like, I'm going to stay up late. I'm going to stay up all night. It's like, no, not really. Go to bed. Right. And so it's kind of like that child's voice in the back of your head that's telling you to do things. And then you kind of stepping out of the room and just being like, okay, let that voice just take over and do anything. And then you wake up from it and you're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Right. So when you stay in your own power, and that's what we teach you in self-discovery and Crush That Food Thing self-discovery system. When you stay in your own power, and you know what that means, you will never want to betray yourself with food or anything else again. You will become whole and undivided. So there won't be two voices going in the back and forth and back and forth. Like, you won't be questioning yourself. You won't be giving your power away. Your power will be with you. So in order to be able to understand, like, where do you go? Like, what ends up happening? What's the first part of this? We're going to talk a little bit about triggers. So many people say that they just want to have control of themselves and they want to have control of their eating habits. And they can imagine themselves sticking to a perfect eating, healthy plan all the time. And this is one of the problems, because that all the time part means that there gets to be a nothing part. And this all or nothing mindset that I'm certain that many of you are living in, and I know I certainly lived there for my decades of my life, is setting an unrealistic expectation of what it is that it means to be able to live in reality, like in a normal daily routine, and not have like food or perhaps aggravations or things that sort of trip you along your path, that you can see a higher level overview of what's going on, and you're not triggered by things that cause you to feel like you get sort of stuck in a very narrow mindset where suddenly you're just like, whoosh, you're gone. And we'll tell ourselves these things a lot of times. We'll say like, well, how do you respond to something? And you might say, well, it depends on the situation. Also depends on the person. If there's a person there and they annoy me, like then I could be a total whatever. Or, if there's somebody else, and it depends. Totally depends on the person. So that means that we are completely going out of our power, and we're allowing ourselves to just kind of let life dictate for us, like how we're going to respond to ourselves at any given moment. This is where the triggers, and I'll teach you that triggers are merely unhealed parts of yourself, are tripping you and sneaking you down a timeline where suddenly you're not here in the now. You're not, I'm 52 years old. You're not, operating from a system that is your today's self. Suddenly you're operating from the mindset of maybe a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old. So it just sneaks you down this timeline because it's triggering to you, and you can feel it because it's almost like a record just going off in your head where you're like, what just happened? Whoa. And that's when you end up betraying yourself and you end up doing things that later on you're like, oh man. And food is actually part of that if you're stuck in that mindset. So that all or nothing mindset gives us the idea that we can have this like perfect, day. And then if something trips us up, then it leaves us feeling helpless. And then we want to use food to avoid the uncomfortable emotions. And then the trigger ends up continuing because it's almost like the response to use food is allowing the trigger to grow. Now, the trigger is like the weakest part of yourself, right? Because it's unhealed. And so it's almost like pulling off a Band-Aid over and over on a wound, and you won't let it heal, right? So you keep ripping that Band-Aid off, and so it keeps opening up. Well, it's the same thing. And so if you don't address the triggers, and please know that I understand that, many times people have gone to therapy or counseling or even done other self-discovery works. The thing is that if the trigger's still triggering, then there's another part of the journey to explore. And so I know for myself, I had been to lots of therapy, lots of counseling, lots of things. Honestly, to the point where when I went to a new counselor, I just wanted to like walk in with like a kind of a bio sheet and be like, yep, okay, this happened when I was 8, this happened when I was 12, this happened, here you go. Here you go. Here's my sheet. Like, and I didn't really feel like talking about that past stuff was as helpful at certain times as I ended up experiencing with self-discovery, because self-discovery, instead of going into that past stuff, actually allows me to start to operate from my future self. So instead of like having all the past stuff memorized, right? The future gets memorized. So it's like, I'm going to memorize a future version of myself that is no longer triggered by this situation or circumstance or food or whatever it be. And like, I can envision that version of me and I just go towards her. So then every decision that I make today, every micro decision that I make today ends up being aligned with the future version of myself. It doesn't trip me and trap me into getting triggered into the past version of myself. So then I'm no longer using food or other things to betray myself. And so once you can see this from a wider lens and you can open up new headspace for the parts of being able to stay in your power, in your own power, then you'll be able to see a higher level overview and you won't get tripped up so much. And so that brings me to part 2 of our episode today, which is conscious intentions. And we're going to talk about the conscious intentions of eating, because I know that many people try to set like food guidelines. You know, they want to follow strict diets and take supplements and meticulously count calories and all that stuff. And this approach is a real mistake if you're struggling with emotional eating or binge eating. And there's kind of a 2 different like thoughts about this, right? So emotional eating would really be where, you know, you tell yourself that no matter what the feeling is, that you're just going to eat. Binge eating is where you get that trigger and you're out. Like you leave the building. So it's kind of 2 different parts. They're both coming from the subconscious. But at the same time, like one feels like it's a little bit more soothing and one feels a bit scary because you kind of wake up from it and you're like, whoa, like what just happened? It's almost like an out of body experience. And while I'm on that topic, I'll just talk a little bit about overeating, right? Because these are like 3 things that can sort of be similarly thought about. But overeating is really where, you know, maybe you're at a restaurant and you're at a party or whatever, or you're on a cruise, you know, and you're just like, dang, that is so good. And you just eat too much to the point where you're like, that doesn't feel great. But at the same time, it's very different than the binge eating part or than even the emotional eating part, because the overeating part, you know, can be more of a conscious decision. So it's more like, I really like this and I don't want to put it down. So there's kind of 3 different parts here. But most people, no matter what they're struggling with, whether it be overeating, binge eating, or emotional eating, they might think that the approach to go after a solution is to like start to monitor and measure every single bite and stick to a rigid diet plan, or weight loss becomes just the ultimate goal. But then again, if we're not fixing the root cause of the problem and addressing the root cause of the problem, then that weight will just come back on and then you'll be like, oh, wait, what just happened? The reason why that happens is because weight is a symptom of an underlying problem. And emotional eating, or like binge eating, it's not a conscious problem. It's actually a subconscious one, like I shared before. So the real issue is beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. And when you try and solve a subconscious problem with a conscious solution, like going on a diet, you're always going to lead yourself to frustration. And so it's interesting because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the subconscious intentions. If frustration is something that you already feel, and somewhere within you that is a craving, because once you're frustrated, you get to eat, you might actually be craving the frustration. And so that's why it separates you from the conscious decision, which might say like, I don't want to eat this. And then you end up eating it. then you feel frustrated. So whatever your end result is always what your subconscious intention will be. So I want you to think about like how many times you've done this cycle, and then start to wake yourself up from the idea that you're going to be able to fix this subconscious problem with a conscious solution, right? Think about like how many times you've been around that loop. Go on a diet, lose weight, overeat, regain the weight. The cycle is absolutely exhausting and it's super unproductive. I did this for 30 years and I'd probably still be doing it if I hadn't opened up my mindset to a new level of awareness. And if you haven't listened to some of the other episodes here, I don't remember what episode it is right now, but if you haven't listened to some of the other episodes here, there is an episode that is called Levels of Awareness Training. So go ahead and listen to that so that way you can understand what I'm talking about when I say levels of awareness. So now we want to be able to shift our focus into part 3, which is the subconscious intentions. And I talked about that a little all throughout the training so far, of saying that like your results are what your subconscious intentions are. So let's think about the difference between what conscious intentions are and what subconscious intentions are. So I like to describe it as an iceberg. So think about the tip of an iceberg hanging out above the water. Then you've got your water line. And then underneath the surface is this huge, massive mound of, iceberg, right? So when you think about it as a whole, just like 10 to 30% of the tip of the iceberg are above the surface, right? So that means that 70 to 90% are below, underneath the surface, where you can't see it. So it's not that it's not there, it's just that you can't see it. So put that into your conscious thoughts and recognize that some of the things that you're doing, some of the things that you're telling yourself, some of the things that you're making real are coming from below the level of your conscious awareness. So that's why you'll wake up the next day and be like, oh my God, what did I do? And the thing is that a lot of the triggers, all of the triggers are underneath in the subconscious mind, right? Because they're coming from past events. And that's why you've got them memorized. And that's why we can help you to consciously memorize a future version of yourself, a version of you who you haven't met yet, a version of you who can keep ice cream in the house, who can walk into a buffet and not overeat, or not, have something happen that doesn't feel amazing in your daily life, and not instantaneously decide that stopping at a fast food restaurant and gobbling up 2 hamburgers in your car is going to be the solution, because it's not, right? So those are the times where your subconscious mind will sneak you down that timeline and take you into a past version of yourself where there's a trigger that lives. And through that trigger, you're going to fuel and feed and grow the weakest version of yourself. You're actually going to strengthen your weakness. And so I don't think you want to do that anymore. But until you learned about this training, you might not have known any better. And if you don't know any better, you can't do any better. So going back into those subconscious intentions, and we'll talk about eating. So subconscious intentions around eating are an underlying emotional or psychological motive that drives you to eat something without being fully aware of what it is that you're doing. And so these intentions often stem from past experiences, emotions, or beliefs, and we can have limiting beliefs. So think about the word limited beliefs. We could also have what's called adopted limiting beliefs. And adopted limiting beliefs is that someone else told you that. Someone else told you when you were a baby that you had a healthy appetite. And so you just are like, oh, okay, I don't know, I have a healthy appetite. But it's coming from a subconscious belief. It influences your relationship with yourself. It was told to you by someone else. And maybe it was something that was told to you that's made you doubt your own intuition. Like to know when you're doing something that is going to be hurting you, but you might not know that because you've got this belief stuffed in there. And a belief can become like a paradigm. It is a paradigm. It's a belief system that basically just makes you believe that it's true. And for those of you who don't know what a paradigm is, think like Roger Bannister, who was like the guy who broke the 4-minute mile. So before he broke the 4-minute mile, it was thought that if you ran faster than 4 minutes, that your heart would explode. I don't blame anybody for not wanting to try this. But he was like, what? It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm not, okay, I'll show you that it's not, that your heart's not going to explode if you run under 4 minutes. So nobody up until that time had done it. And then he did it, proving that it can be done. And so then guess what? Other people broke the 4-minute mile. So when you're living in these limiting belief systems, or you're living in these paradigms, you can oftentimes talk yourself out of things from a conscious level. And it's because there's a subconscious belief system going on. Examples of a subconscious intention around food would be like telling yourself that you're seeking food for comfort when you darn well know that afterwards you're going to feel like garbage, right? Telling yourself that you're using food to avoid feeling your feelings or feeling your emotions, and then ending up feeling alone and isolated from others and not even recognizing yourself, and convincing yourself that food is the only thing that you can rely on or depend on, which is a really sneaky trick of your subconscious, because it's the opposite. It actually isolates you more. It makes you feel very, very alone, even if you're in a room full of people. Telling yourself that eating or restricting yourself and then rewarding yourself, or punishing yourself by like restricting your foods that you can take in, is a good idea. And then convincing yourself that you're going to start over again on Monday, or this time will be the last time, or I'll never do this again, or saying things that are absolutely unrealistic, like I'm never going to eat chocolate again, I'm never going to eat bread again. Like, those are just unrealistic, and honestly, they're quite immature promises that you would be making to yourself. And it's a sneaky trick of your subconscious. And the last example is telling yourself that you want to maintain control. So telling yourself that you want to maintain control of yourself is a really, really bad idea, because when you tell yourself that you want to maintain control, basically all you're telling yourself is that you can't be trusted, and that you can't be free to make good choices that serve you both in the moment and long term. So basically, you're telling yourself that if I put this one cookie in my mouth, that I'm just going to lose all, sights of myself. And that's not really true at all. But if you're telling yourself that you want to be in control of yourself, the only reason why you would ever tell yourself that is if you were starting off from a place of telling yourself that you're out of control, because you wouldn't have a goal of being in control of yourself if you weren't already starting with a starting place of being out of control. So can you see that this is a complete contradiction? And if you can change those thoughts consciously, if you can look at this list and say, wait a minute, what? You know what? I tell myself those things all the time. I didn't know that that was a subconscious intention to hurt myself, to betray myself, to sabotage my own best interest. I didn't know that. Well, now you do. Which is why this brings us to the last thing of taking imperfect action. So what does this all mean for your life, and how do you take imperfect action? So the bottom line is that the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So if you find yourself being kind to others and treating people, very like you keep your trust with them, people can trust you. Like you have integrity. You know that, there's things that you would never say yes to somebody and then, betray them. I mean, you trust yourself. You feel that you're a good person, like everything feels aligned on the outside of you. But then the way that you're treating yourself is the very opposite of what it is that you're showing to others. And you think that you're just doing the things that you're doing just to yourself and that you're not harming anyone else. So it doesn't matter. So you're sitting here and you're, stuffing and shoveling and secretly eating and all that stuff. And you think that nobody's seeing you. my friend, you're seeing you. And if you don't matter, then there's your problem right there. We have to fix the reason why you are completely comfortable showing yourself that version of yourself, and you're extremely uncomfortable showing that to anyone else. So I want you to ask yourself right now, do I eat with integrity? Is the version of me that shows up to myself the same version of me that I show to others? Or is there a mismatch? And if there's a mismatch and you end up doing the same thing over and over again, and then feeling ashamed or embarrassed or guilty or disappointed in yourself, that was the goal. That was the subconscious intention. And so until we can get a grasp on this, until we can understand why this is, where did the roots come from? And then you might say to me, well, Lisa, I already know where the roots came from. It doesn't matter. We haven't fixed them yet. And so we're going to want to be able to gain access to a solution that is better than, well, I've tried everything. Because honestly, you haven't fixed the problem. So it doesn't matter if you think you've tried everything, you haven't fixed the problem. And I always want to be clear that it doesn't matter how long you've been struggling. It doesn't matter. I struggled for 30 years. It doesn't matter. I work with women who are, a lot of the women that I work with are somewhere between 50 and 75. It doesn't matter how long you've been struggling. What matters is that the things that you've done in the past have just been stepping stones that have led you to this place today. And perhaps if we had met, meaning if you were listening to this podcast 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been open-minded to hear the information. But since you're still here and, you're listening, some part of you is like, oh, wait a minute, I've never thought about that before. And so perhaps there's a part of you that wants to get curious about learning new things. So that way you can step into your own power and step away from this past version of yourself where, like I said, you might be unrecognizable. So that concludes our episode today. And we always give some goodies in the show notes. So we still have in the show notes the Food Freedom Power Guide. So you can go ahead and grab yourself that. And there's always an opportunity to take a little bite-sized taste of what self-discovery is. It's a beginner course, and this one is called the Mindset Makeover. So it's a super cool course. And if you've already done the Mindset Makeover and you want to have like a next first right step, you're always going to see a lot of smaller courses in the show notes. And so just go ahead and check everything out. And if you want to get in touch with me and you want to ask some questions, you can go ahead and send me a private message on social media at coachlisacallahan.com or send me an email at lisa@coachlisacallahan.com and I will reach back out to you soon. All right, that's all for now. All right, my beautiful friend, that brings us to the end of another episode from the Crush Cravings with Confidence podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening today and took something from our conversation that you are going to put into immediate action. I love spending time with you and would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with at least one friend today who you think might be struggling too. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any other amazing topics. And please, please do leave me a review. It would mean the world to me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.